My wife told me, "You're just a placeholder until Mark comes back." So I left before he did. I am a 31-year-old man, and I heard the sentence that broke my marriage while I was holding a box of winter clothes. She said I was a placeholder until Mark came back, and she said it like she was reading a label she had finally decided to trust. I did not drop the box. I placed it on the chair because I wanted the room to remember that I was careful even when I hurt. I kept standing there, quiet, because quiet has been my strongest habit since childhood. She walked into the kitchen and pretended to make tea. I watched her move and wondered how many things in our life had been placeholders too. The plant by the window. The framed photo from a weekend trip. The promises I thought were small but true. A placeholder is an object you use while waiting for the real thing. I felt like a borrowed chair someone never expected to keep. We met 3 years ago at a friend's birthday where people shouted over music and called it connection. She said my calm felt like shade on a hot day. She liked that I remembered small details and fixed loose screws without being asked. I liked that she chose groceries with care and said simple meals could protect a week. We were not dramatic. We were practical. We thought that meant we were safe. She told me about Mark in pieces, the way people test how much history a new person can hold. Mark was the first great love. He was heat and trouble and fast decisions. He left for a contract abroad and promised to return with a plan. She waited a year and then another. She said the distance made her feel like she lived in parentheses. She told me she closed that chapter because a life cannot be an airport lounge. She said she was done with waiting. I believed her because belief felt like a kind of work I knew how to do. The first months were easy. We built a quiet routine with coffees at the same hour and walks that kept our nerves steady. I repaired a shelf while she painted a wall and we both laughed at the crooked first coat. We picked a sturdy dining table because she said meals were the spine of a home. I asked about Mark less and less, not because I forgot him, but because asking felt like feeding a ghost. She said she was fine. She said closing a door takes time. I said I understood. Understanding can be a disguise for fear. Signs arrived like light leaks under a door. She kept a shoebox in the back of a closet and called it a memory kit. It held a ticket stub, a key with no home, and a folded letter with a foreign stamp. She did not hide it, but she did not invite it into the room. On certain days she stared at the box like a person who knows a stove is hot and still puts her hand close. I told myself everyone has an archive. I told myself love means respecting archives you do not read. Last autumn she started running in the evenings. She said it cleared her mind. She never liked running before. She came home flushed and bright and silent, which is a strange combination unless you are boiling inside. She said she was learning to tolerate discomfort. I said I was proud. Pride is a coat you put on someone when you want them to feel warm, even if you are cold. In December she changed her phone passcode. She said she had read an article about privacy. I pretended not to care because trust should not be a searchlight. In January she insisted that we cancel a trip to see my parents because work had piled up. She said the project at her job would decide her promotion. I went alone and brought back a jar of jam my mother had set aside for her. She tasted it and said it was too sweet and then apologized and said she was tired. February was the first time I heard Mark's name again in her mouth. She said a mutual friend had mentioned that he would be back in Europe within the year. She said it in a casual way that was anything but casual, like a person placing a knife on a table and saying it was just cutlery. I nodded and kept my face level. She watched me like she expected fire and was surprised to find rain. I asked if she was okay. She said she did not know. We slept on opposite edges of the bed that night, careful not to wake anything between us. I started to notice small edits in our home. The record player moved closer to the window where the light hit it in late afternoons. The spare guitar left the corner and sat on a stand like a guest of honor. She started using a cologne she had once said reminded her of another life. She said she had changed her mind. People change their minds, she said. I said I understood again and felt something inside me shrink at the repetition of that sentence. Understanding, when used wrong, is a leash you put on yourself. The sentence arrived on a Saturday morning, the kind of pale winter day that makes apartments feel honest. I was labeling the box of winter clothes because I refused to trust my own memory when seasons change. She walked in from the balcony and looked at me like she had reached a decision and hated herself for it. She said I was a placeholder until Mark came back. She said it quickly and without breath, like jumping into cold water. She added that she did not mean it cruelly. She said I had been good to her. She said she thought she had repaired the part of her that kept a man-shaped gap open, and she had realized she had not. I asked her one question, and I asked it without anger because anger would have made it easier for her to paint me as the problem. I asked whether she had been talking with him. She said sometimes. She said the messages were light. She said he had asked about her work and her mother's health. She said he would be back in the city for a while. She said he would like to see her. She admitted she wanted to see him to close the chapter with proper punctuation. She said closure like it was medicine. I stood there with the box and realized the medicine was not for us. I walked to the window and watched a man parallel park badly, because ordinary scenes keep a person from falling off the edge. I told her that I heard her. I told her that I would not hold anyone by the ankle to make them stay. I told her that if her heart was a room with a door propped open for someone else, the draft would make us both sick. She nodded and said she was sorry. She said the word softly and without a plan attached to it. Sorry, without a plan, is a bead that rolls under furniture and gathers dust. I did not throw accusations. I did not ask for timelines that would spin me into madness. I put the box down, took a walk around the block, and bought two things, a notebook and a pack of heavy-duty trash bags. The notebook was for lists because lists turned storms into lines. The trash bags were for decisions that needed proof. I came back and started with the easiest list, what I would take if I left. It contained the books that had real notes in the margins, the toolbox my grandfather gave me, 2 framed photos, a rug I loved, the spare set of keys to my brother's place, and the documents that make a life official. The second list was harder, what I would leave. I wrote her name at the top because leaving her, even in pieces, felt like cutting out a rib. That afternoon I moved quietly through rooms we had built together and touched objects like I was confirming their names. She stayed in the bedroom and then the shower and then the balcony in rotations that looked like a person cleaning but was really a person hiding. She texted me from the balcony to say she would like to talk later. I texted back that later worked. We did not talk. Evening arrived like slow water. We ate separately and pretended to watch the same show. The next morning I woke with a feeling that was not peace and not panic. It was a decision wearing a jacket. I messaged my brother and asked if his couch was truly available or only polite. He said it was mine with no questions and a spare key. He added that sometimes staying is a form of theater, and he knew I did not like theater. I packed 2 suitcases and filled 3 trash bags with clothes for donation because weight makes people believe in reality. I left her the bed and the records and the dining table and most of the kitchen because I wanted the apartment to keep looking like a home. I took the rug because I had picked it before I met her, and I needed proof that I had a shape that existed before this. When she woke, she saw the suitcases and covered her mouth like a person watching a glass slip from a table. She asked where I was going. I told her I would stay with my brother. I told her I would give us both space before Mark arrived so that the meeting she wanted would not happen in the ruins of something I was still pretending to hold. I told her I would not stand in a hallway while she chose between 2 doors. I told her I loved her and would likely always love her in a way that would soften and fade like old fabric, not vanish like smoke. I told her I needed self-respect more than I needed the daily closeness of a woman who was already walking towards someone else in her mind. She cried and then stopped and then nodded. She said she respected the clarity. She said she hated herself for the sentence. She said she was confused. She said it was not fair to me. It was not. Fairness is not love, but love without fairness rots. I picked up my bag and kissed the air near her hair because she flinched without moving. I left my key on the hook by the door and took the spare because a person needs to access their own past in order to pack it. At my brother's apartment I placed the suitcases by the wall and sat on a couch that had never held my marriage. The relief was not joy. It was oxygen after a long hallway. The silence was not grief. It was room to breathe without guessing. I showered too long because water hides thinking. I made a simple meal because hunger can pretend to be sadness. Then I opened the notebook and wrote the title of a new list, What I Would Not Do. I wrote that I would not stalk their social media. I wrote that I would not ask mutual friends to report. I wrote that I would not send questions at midnight when the ache sharpened. I wrote that I would not degrade her to make my pain look justified. I wrote that I would not turn Mark into a villain just because the story would be easier with one. I wrote that I would not audition for a role in my own life. The first night was hard. The second night was harder because the body learns absence. On the third night I slept 6 hours and woke to the quiet, and the quiet did not bite me. I went to work every day and did it well because being good at something is a glue when everything else is coming apart. I stopped by my apartment twice to pick up mail and plants. The first time she was there and looked like someone who had cried in the afternoon and washed her face for evening. She said she was seeing Mark on Sunday to talk. She said she would tell me afterward. I said she did not owe me updates about her choices, only honesty if the choices would cross practical lines like leases and accounts. She nodded. We stood in the doorway like two people who had broken a heavy thing and could not decide whether to sweep the pieces or find glue. On Sunday I sat at my brother's table with my phone silent and read a book that had nothing to do with love. The clock moved slowly, which is a mercy when you are learning to be alone. At 9, a message arrived from her. She wrote that she had met Mark in a public place and that the past had walked in the door with him. She wrote that she felt relief and awe and sorrow. She wrote that she needed time to think and that she would not contact me for a few days. She thanked me for leaving before he returned because it had spared her a kind of cruelty she could not live with. She said I did not deserve what she had done to our vows. She used the word vows even though we had kept the ceremony small and simple. The word still carried weight. I put the phone face down and breathed. I felt two things at once, a flood of cold that started at my chest and a small, stubborn warmth under it that refused to die. The warmth was not hope for us. It was respect for the part of me that had moved before the humiliation could. I slept that night without dreaming. In the morning I woke with a sentence that sounded like steel and mercy at the same time, I would not be present for my own replacement. I called a locksmith and asked about changing the storage lock on the unit that held some of my tools and boxes. I called my landlord and asked about the process for removing my name from the lease when the other tenant wanted to keep the place. I called the utilities and arranged a split that would end my side at the end of the month. I moved my name like a person pulling stakes from soil. It hurt. It also meant I had decided that my love was not a hallway. It was a room with an actual door I could close. It taught me where the windows were. It taught me how to get out without burning the place down. I told her, by message, that I would return on Friday with 2 friends to collect the last of my things. I told her she did not need to be there. She replied that Friday was fine and that she would leave a set of mugs we bought together because she said I had picked them and deserved to keep them. I smiled at the word deserve used for something as small as mugs and felt its real weight anyway. On Friday I returned with 2 friends who did not ask questions and lifted boxes like decency. I took the rug and the toolbox and the books with my own handwriting in the margins. I stood in the bedroom once, alone, and looked at the bed that had learned our shapes and felt gratitude and pain braided so tight they were the same rope. I placed a small note on the dresser that said thank you for the years, because gratitude belongs even on days that feel like exits from a burning theater. I locked the door behind me and felt my hand shake only after the key turned. I slept that night at my brother's place with my toolbox as a sentry beside the couch. I dreamed of a seaside town where doors had small bells and every time someone left, a sound followed them into the street. I woke up and decided that the sound might be my life learning a new rhythm. I poured coffee, opened the notebook, and wrote the next title, How to Leave Before He Does Without Becoming the Kind of Man Who Never Arrives Again. I made a plan that included dumb, life-saving tasks: move for an hour each day, call my mother on Wednesdays, accept invitations that did not hurt, decline invitations that did. Read at least 30 pages of anything. Eat food that required a pan. Keep the apartment clean enough that the night could land somewhere without tripping. Say the truth when asked how I am without turning the truth into a performance. It was a plan for a person who intended to survive without becoming bitter. Survival without bitterness is a skill you practice like scales. The following week, a final message came from her. She wrote that she had told Mark she needed to be alone for a while before deciding anything permanent. She wrote that she did not want to step into a new story carrying the filth of an unfinished one. She wrote that she would not contest the practical steps I had taken. She wrote that she was grateful I had kept things calm. She did not ask me to come back. She did not promise that she would one day ask. The absence of promise hurt more than anger and less than false hope. I read it, put the phone down, and went to the window. The city looked exactly the same. I understood for the first time that this is what endings usually look like. Not fireworks. Not funerals. Just buildings and buses and a person with a notebook making a plan. I stood there long enough to see the light change. Then I started the second list of the day, small ways to leave well. It began with 3 words I could actually do: return keys clean. I moved back into a 1-bedroom near the park, the kind of place that smells like other people's cooking for a week before it becomes yours. I carried in the rug and the toolbox and the books and felt like I was watering cut flowers, trying to keep something alive while the roots remembered where to grow. I assembled a thrift store table and placed 2 mugs on it even though I mostly drank alone. I liked the empty chair anyway. It reminded me that I was not building a bunker, I was building a room with a second seat. The first month was made of small firsts. First Saturday morning without her list on the fridge. First grocery run where I bought simple vegetables because grief makes spices complicated. First Sunday evening when I did not fold blankets in pairs. I did walk after dinner every day to keep the air moving inside me. I called my mother on Wednesdays like I had written. She did not ask for details because she is wise enough to let a story come out in its own words. She told me about her neighbor's broken fence and a cake that refused to rise and the show she liked. Ordinary talk kept the ache from becoming a religion. Money became an ally. I checked balances and made a budget that gave sorrow no excuse to turn into chaos. I canceled shared subscriptions without bitterness because clean lines prevent later fights. I set aside a small amount each week for something stupid and bright: a book I did not need, a new spatula, a plant with leaves like coins. I learned that cheap avocado toast tastes better when you make it yourself after 30 minutes of walking and a podcast that does not mention love. People reached out, because people do. Some wanted the story. I gave them the version that protected my dignity and hers. I said we had reached a truth, and I had chosen not to stand in a triangle. I said no one was a monster. I said timing can be cruel even when intentions are human. A few friends tried to pour gasoline on my side. I did not accept it. Fire gives good light for a minute and then burns your own furniture. She and I exchanged 2 practical emails in those weeks, one about the last bill in my name and one about a package that had arrived. Each message was polite and short, as if we had never fallen asleep with feet tangled and to-do lists whispered from pillow to pillow. Each message ended without a question, which is its own kind of end. I felt anger once while washing dishes, the kind of clean, sharp anger that wants to rewrite all the good so that it cannot hurt you. I let the anger talk for 5 minutes and then I told it that it could stay for the evening and then go. It went. It always goes if you do not feed it. 2 months passed like a slow train. I did not see her. I heard from a mutual friend that she was quiet and working and keeping to herself. Another friend said Mark had been in the city and then left again for another contract. The world felt like a chessboard in which people move according to arrangements you cannot see. I kept my eyes on my own squares. I learned to cook a decent soup without looking at a recipe. I patched a tear in the couch with thread that did not match and decided I liked the scar. My brother dragged me to a weekend market because he refuses to let me live only inside my head. I bought a second-hand jacket and a small painting of a shoreline. The painter told me that the sea only looks blue because the sky lends it a color. I thought about how much of my marriage had looked healthy because my faith in it had dyed it a better shade. I pinched the frame between my fingers and carried it home like a lesson I did not want to drop. In the third month, she wrote again. She said she had moved apartments. She said she had handed our old place to a new couple with soft voices and too many plants, and they had looked at the rooms like students waiting for a lecture. She said the handover made her hands shake. She said she wished me well and hoped I was eating. That last line made me laugh and then sit down. I wrote back that I was eating, and I mentioned the soup, and I said the new place sounded good. I did not ask who helped her move. I did not ask whether Mark had come back or left again or hovered like weather on the horizon. I did not ask because asking would not change the shape of my days anymore. Questions are a currency. I was saving mine. There is a moment in any recovery when the future peeks around the doorframe like a child checking if the adult is done crying. My moment came on a Tuesday evening when I realized the apartment smelled like my cooking more than it smelled like loss. I was slicing an orange for dessert because I had become the kind of man who eats fruit on purpose. I looked at the clock and saw that it was not late. The room felt large in a good way. I took the orange to the window and ate it slice by slice and told myself a true thing: I had left before he came back, and because of that, I had not watched myself disappear. I existed, whole, in the mirror. The price was heavy. The receipt was clean. That week I met with a counselor. I did not want advice. I wanted language. I wanted to call things by their names so that they would stop running the house at night. She listened and then asked me to tell the story without using the words betrayal or victim. I tried and failed twice and then succeeded on the third try. I called it grief for a life built around a misunderstanding. She nodded and said grief is love with nowhere to go. She said I could give it a place to sit by creating new rituals. She suggested I write 4 letters I would not send, one to her, one to Mark, one to the version of myself that stayed, and one to the version that left. I wrote them over 3 evenings. The letter to the version that stayed was the shortest. It said he was braver than I gave him credit for. He tried. The letter to the version that left was longer. It thanked him for carrying the boxes across the street without breaking a single plate. In month 4, my mother called and said she had found a sweater of mine at her house from the trip I took alone in January. She asked if I wanted her to mail it. I said I would come by instead. At her kitchen table I told her the whole story, with pauses and without trying to perform forgiveness like a trick. She listened and then put her hand over mine and said something I knew but needed to hear. She said leaving is not failure, sometimes it is the only way to hold on to the part of yourself you promised to bring into a marriage. She said a promise to yourself cannot be the one you break every time someone else changes a plan. We ate soup and she sent me home with bread wrapped in a towel like a childhood. Spring arrived while I was doing the dishes one night, which is how springs arrive in real life, inside chores. The light lasted longer, and I found myself staying out in the park after work, watching people pass with their own bags of joy and worry. I began to say yes to invitations again. I attended a small gallery opening for a coworker and stood in front of a photo of a door half open to a hallway. The caption said the light knows where to land. I did not cry. I did not need to. I saw her once in the grocery store near my old neighborhood. She was selecting lemons like a surgeon, pressing each one gently. She saw me and froze for the smallest second and then smiled. We stood an aisle apart because people were passing with carts and we are polite by design. She said she was well. I said I was well. She asked if I had found a new place. I said yes and mentioned the park. She said she was glad. There was a rhythm to the exchange that felt like two people who had once shared a life and were now sharing air for a minute. We did not mention Mark. We did not need to. Our silence was not a lie. It was care. We wished each other a good evening and moved on. I bought 4 lemons because it felt like the correct number. A month later, a mutual friend told me she had left the city for a while to visit family and consider a job in another region. The friend said Mark was in and out of airports like always. The friend said that some stories that looked inevitable from far away do not look that way up close. I thought about trains that appear to collide and then pass on different tracks. I felt a soft sadness for all of us, the kind that does not want revenge, only rest. One Sunday I took the jacket from the market and walked to the shoreline in the painting's direction. The river is not the sea, but water is water when you need it. I sat on a bench and thought about placeholders. I realized I had been a placeholder once for my own life too, waiting to feel deserving, waiting to be chosen, waiting to move until everything lined up. Leaving before he returned had not been only about self-respect in a triangle. It had also been about stepping into my own timeline. I no longer wanted to live on standby, even for love. I started small projects in the apartment because projects prove you are real. I built a narrow bookshelf and sanded it until my shoulders ached. I painted the bedroom wall a color with a quiet name. I made a playlist of songs that do not ask questions. I invited my brother and 2 friends for dinner and served a meal I was proud of. I slept afterward like a person who had used his body for good work. In the morning, I looked around and saw that the room had made space for the kind of future that does not need to win against the past in order to exist. On the anniversary of the day I left, I wrote one more letter I did not send. It was to the man I will be in 5 years. I told him I hoped he still kept plants alive. I told him I hoped he still returned texts. I told him I hoped that when he met someone new, he would bring his whole self to the first coffee and not a version shaped by fear. I told him that if he ever heard a sentence as cruel as the one I heard, he would treat it as a fire alarm and walk calmly to the exit again, not to punish anyone, but to honor the promise he made to himself one winter morning in a small apartment with a box of clothes in his hands. I do not hate her. I do not love her the same way. The love changed shape the way water does when you pour it into a different glass. It is still water. It still reflects light. It is not the glass I live in now. Sometimes I wake at 4 in the morning and feel the old ache pressed thin like paper. I get up, drink water, and stand by the window until the city remembers that it can be quiet. I go back to bed and sleep again. Healing looks like that, interruptions that get shorter until you notice whole nights have passed without a visit. There is no dramatic end to tell. He did not return to claim her in a blaze. She did not run to my door with apologies and a suitcase. I did not break down in a grand speech. We each made 100 small decisions that added up to separate lives. People think endings need spectacle because they see too many movies. In real life, the spectacle is the sunrise that keeps happening no matter who you are holding. My wife told me I was a placeholder until Mark came back. I left before he did. The door closed behind me with a sound I can still hear if I try. It is not a sound of loss anymore. It is a sound of a hinge doing its job. I keep the notebook in a drawer. The last list inside it is called Reasons to Stay Next Time. It has only 3 lines. The first says mutual truth. The second says daily kindness. The third says no ghosts in the room. I read it sometimes before sleep. It is not a spell. It is a promise made in clear air, in a small apartment near a park, by a man who finally learned that leaving well is just another way of arriving where he belongs.
Follow me for more stories.